Smile, darling. It will be over soon. I thought I would—
Stand still, Amelia. This is bigger than either of us now.
Please don't do this. I'm not—
That contract is
sealed by the Crown's own registrar. You'll find her father's claim on her hand expired the moment mine was filed.
That's—
It was already too late for anyone to stop him.
The candles had burned low by the time the papers were brought out, though no one in the ballroom seemed to notice.
They were too busy admiring the chandeliers, too dazzled by champagne and gold leaf to see the quiet transaction unfolding at its edges, which Amelia thought, with a strange, floating detachment, was rather the point. Her mother's diamonds had multiplied that season. New earrings. A new brooch was pinned just above her heart, gleaming under the candlelight like a small, cold star. Amelia had asked, once, where the money had come from. Her mother had only smiled and told her not to trouble herself with things she couldn't understand.
She understood now.
She had understood for weeks, ever since the tall man with the ledger grey eyes had begun calling on her father in the evenings. The two of them murmuring behind closed doors while her mother hovered in the corridor, twisting her rings. Amelia had pressed her ear to the wood more than once. She had heard numbers. She had heard the word settlement. She had heard her own name, spoken the way one might speak of a horse or a parcel of land.
Tonight, she understood everything.
She stood at the centre of the ballroom floor in her ivory gold gown, the tiara her mother had fastened into her hair pressing cold against her scalp, and watched the creditor's men approach with a folded document and a fountain pen already uncapped. Her father's hand closed around her wrist, first firm, practiced, the grip of a man who had done this kind of business before, just never with his own daughter as the currency. Her mother's fingers found her other arm a heartbeat later, diamonds flashing, expression carved from ice. "Smile," her mother whispered. "It will be over soon." It was not a comfort. It was an instruction. The creditor stepped forward with his pen and his smile and his cold, assessing eyes, and somewhere behind Amelia 100 conversations continued without pause. Laughter, the clink of glasses, an orchestra playing something light and unbothered because no one in that glittering room believed a girl could be sold in the middle of a party and the music would dare to stop.
Tears blurred the gold of the chandeliers above her.
She did not look away from the document being unfolded in front of her, the ink still wet from her father's earlier signature, waiting only for the final line. She thought, distantly, that she would remember the smell of candle wax for the rest of her life. And she thought just before the doors at the far end of the ballroom slammed open with a force that silenced the orchestra mid-note, that whatever happened next could not possibly be worse than this. She was wrong. And she was right. She had no way of knowing which yet, only that the air in the room had changed, that every head was turning, that a man in a midnight blue coat was cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk, his eyes locked on her as though she were the only thing standing in a burning building he'd come to put out.
Whatever he wanted, it was already too late for anyone to stop him.
The creditor's pen never touched the page. The doors did not simply open, they were thrown, wood cracking against stone with a sound like a gunshot, and every candle flame in the ballroom seemed to bend sideways in the gust that followed him in. Nathan Kingscroft did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence that fell across the room did the work for him, spreading outward from the doorway like ice across a pond until even the orchestra's last note died mid-breath.
"That contract," he said, his gaze fixed on the creditor's uncapped pen, "is void."
The creditor's smile faltered. "Your Grace, this is a private sale," Nathan cut in, closing the distance between them in 6 unhurried strides, "of a woman who is, as of this morning, under contract to me." He withdrew a folded document from inside his coat and let it fall open against the core. The creditor's chest with a crack of paper that rang through the stunned silence like a slap. sealed by the Crown's own registrar. You'll find her father's claim on her hand, expired the moment mine was filed. Lord Evermont's face was drained of colour. That's impossible. There was no notice, no. There rarely is, when a man moves faster than his enemies expect. Nathan's eyes swept coldly over him, then over Lady Evermont, whose diamonds suddenly looked less like jewels and more like evidence. You sold your daughter in a ballroom full of witnesses, my lord. I merely arrived before the ink dried. A ripple of scandalized whispers broke across the crowd, fans snapping open to hide hungry smiles, because nothing feeds a room of aristocrats faster than watching one of their own be publicly gutted. Amelia stood frozen between her parents' loosening grip and the stranger now stepping between her and the only life she'd ever known, and for one suspended heartbeat, she could not tell if she was being rescued or simply sold again to a buyer with better paperwork.
Let go of her, Nathan said quietly, and it was not a request.
Her father's fingers unclenched from her wrist as though burned. Her mother did not until Nathan's gaze slid to her, level and merciless. And something in it made even Lady Evermont, who had never in her life yielded to anyone, take an involuntary step back. You have no right, Lady Evermont hissed, recovering her voice if not her composure. She is our daughter. She was your daughter, Nathan said, until you decided she was worth more as a debt payment. Tonight, she becomes my wife. I'd suggest you smile for the room, my lady. They're watching to see how gracefully you lose. The crowd's murmur sharpened into something almost gleeful, and Amelia trembling, tears still wet on her face, the ink-scented document with her own name, still lying discarded on the floor beside the creditor's shoe, felt Nathan's hand close around hers, warm and impossibly steady. Come with me, he said, low enough that only she could hear it, and I promise you will never be handed to anyone again. She did not trust him. She had no reason to. But the alternative was standing 3 feet away with a pen and an unfinished contract, and so she let the Duke of Kingscroft lead her through a parting sea of silk and scandal, out into the cold night air, while behind them her father's voice cracked into something desperate and shrill, shouting after a fortune walking out the door in a borrowed carriage. The carriage lurched forward the moment the door shut, wheels striking cobblestone with a jolt that finally broke whatever had been holding Amelia together. She pressed both hands to her mouth to muffle the sound, but the sob came anyway, ragged and humiliating, and she turned her face to the window rather than let this stranger see her fall apart. You're safe, Nathan said from the seat across from her. Not gently. He did not seem a man who knew how to be gentle but steady, like a fact stated for the record. Safe, she repeated, the word tasting bitter. You bought me the same as he did. You just filed the paperwork first. Something flickered across his face, not quite offence, not quite guilt. I did what was necessary to stop your father from selling you to a man who collects debts the way other men collect artwork. Whatever you think of me tomorrow, tonight you are not sitting across from him.
She had no answer to that. It was, infuriatingly, true.
The city blurred past the window in streaks of lamplight and rain-slick stone, and somewhere behind them her mother's diamonds and her father's ruined ledger receded into the dark, and Amelia Evermont understood, with the cold clarity of a woman watching her entire life rewritten in a single night, that she had traded one gilded cage for another. She simply did not yet know the shape of its bars. By the time the carriage crested the final hill, the rain had turned to mist, and Kingscroft Manor rose out of it like something carved from a nightmare, and a cathedral in equal measure towers black against the moon, iron gates taller than any door had a right to be, a small army of guards falling into step the instant the wheels crossed onto the grounds. Amelia pressed her palm to the cold glass. You said I would be safe. This looks like a fortress built to keep people in. It was built to keep people out, Nathan said, watching her with something unreadable. Whether it feels different to you depends entirely on how you choose to see it. She did not answer. She was too busy counting the guards. The great doors opened before the carriage had fully stopped, and Amelia stepped down into the torchlight and the particular hush of a household that had clearly been warned not to ask questions. A woman in dark, severe clothing waited at the top of the stairs, tall, silver-streaked, arms folded with the discipline of someone who had run this house through worse nights than this one. "Mrs. Hargrove," Nathan said, "see that the Duchess has everything she requires." The Duchess. Amelia flinched at the title as though it had been slapped onto her skin, still raw from the ballroom, still smelling of her mother's perfume and her father's desperation. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes swept over her the tear-streaked face, the trembling hands, the tiara still crooked in her hair, and something in her severe expression softened, almost imperceptibly, before hardening again into professional calm. "This way, Your Grace." Amelia followed her through halls lined with portraits of unsmiling ancestors, past locked doors and darkened studies, up a staircase that seemed to climb into the very shadows of the roof, and she thought, with the strange detachment of the utterly exhausted, that this house did not feel like a home. It felt like it was waiting for something. She would not have longed to wonder what. Sleep, when it came, was thin and fractured, full of her father's hands and the creditor's pen and a ballroom that would not stop spinning. She woke before dawn to grey light and the sound of rain against glass, and for one merciful moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered everything. She dressed in silence, plain grey wool, nothing like the gown still crumpled at the foot of the bed, and found her own way down to what she assumed was a breakfast room, only to find Nathan already there, a stack of correspondence beside his plate, untouched tea cooling at his elbow.
He did not rise. He did not smile. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We should discuss terms before you convince yourself of something neither of us can afford."
Amelia sat, spine straight, chin lifted, refusing to let him see how badly her hands wanted to shake. "Terms? You are my wife in name and in law," Nathan said, without preamble. "That protects you from your parents, from the creditor, from any man in this city who thinks an unmarried woman with a ruined family is fair game. It does not make you my possession." He set down the letter he'd been holding. "You will have your own rooms, your own allowance, your own hours. I will not touch you, question you, or expect anything from you beyond the appearance of a marriage when it is required of us in public." "How generous," she said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "It is not generosity." His eyes met hers, and there was something in them cold, deliberate, entirely without apology. "I did not rescue you out of chivalry, Amelia. I required a wife of a certain standing, and your circumstances made you available. I would rather you understand that now than resent me for it later." The honesty was so blunt it almost hurt worse than a lie would have. She had spent one night believing, foolishly, that she had been saved by a man who cared. Instead, she had been acquired by a man who simply had better reasons than her father did. "Then we understand each other," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "You needed a wife. I did not need to be sold. I don't require your affection, Your Grace. Only your word that you'll keep it." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, that she had not wept or raged, but matched him coldness for coldness. "You have it," he said. "This house has rules, and guards, and history I won't burden you with tonight. But within these walls, you are free to do as you please." "Free," she repeated, glancing toward the rain-streaked window, the iron gates just visible beyond it. "That's an interesting word for a woman who can't leave the grounds without an escort." The escort is for your safety, not your confinement, Nathan said, rising from the table, ending the conversation the way he seemed to end everything abruptly and entirely on his own terms. Learn the difference, Amelia. It will serve you well here. He left her alone with cooling tea and a house full of locked doors, and Amelia thought, watching him go, that she had just agreed to spend her life beside a man who spoke of freedom and cages in the same breath, and that she had absolutely no idea, yet, which one Kingscroft Manor truly was. The days that followed fell into a strange, hollow rhythm. Nathan disappeared for hours at a time, sometimes entire days vanishing into meetings, with men who arrived in unmarked carriages and left without introducing themselves. Amelia was given the run of the house, as promised, and found that freedom, when it came wrapped in silence and empty rooms, felt very much like being forgotten. She explored anyway, because idleness had never suited her, not even in her father's house, where she'd spent years quietly balancing household accounts he never bothered to check, finding a strange comfort in numbers that always, unlike people, told the truth. It was that same restless instinct that led her, one grey afternoon nearly a week into her new life, to a door at the end of the east corridor that Miss Eyes, Hargrove had pointedly not mentioned during her tour.
The library.
It was vast and cold, and clearly unused dust thick on the lower shelves, ledgers stacked in crooked, forgotten towers along one wall, as though someone had once meant to organise them and simply stopped. Amelia ran a finger along the nearest spine and drew back a line clean through grey dust.
Nobody has touched these in years.
She should have left them alone. She told herself that, quite firmly, even as she was already pulling the topmost ledger free and settling into the window seat with the kind of focus she hadn't allowed herself since the night her name was nearly signed away in a ballroom. The numbers, at first, were unremarkable. Household expenses, staff wages, grain purchases, stable costs, the mundane arithmetic of running an estate this size. Then she found the first inconsistency. A payment to a supplier for roofing repairs twice, within the same month, for the same section of roof. She frowned, flipped back a page, and checked the totals again. Perhaps a clerical error. She kept reading. By the time the light through the window had shifted from grey to amber, she had found 6 more. By the time it had gone fully dark, and a footman arrived to light the lamps and inform her, with visible discomfort, that dinner had been laid an hour ago and had long since gone cold, she had stopped counting the errors and started counting the money, and the number rising in her calculations was no longer one that could be explained by clumsy bookkeeping. Something in this house was very wrong, and whoever had been managing these accounts for the Duke of Kingscroft had either been catastrophically incompetent or catastrophically greedy. She did not sleep that night either, not from grief this time, but from the particular electric focus of a mind that had finally found something worth solving. By the time dawn broke grey and thin over the estate, Amelia had filled 3 pages of her own notes with dates, discrepancies, and names she did not yet recognise but intended to. She found Nathan at breakfast again, and for the first time since her arrival, she spoke to him without being spoken to first. "Your steward is stealing from you," she said. He set down his cup slowly. "I beg your pardon?" "Mr. Whitlock. Your steward." She placed her notes on the table between them. 3 days' worth of careful, damning arithmetic. "In the past 2 years alone, I've found payments duplicated, invoices inflated well above market rate, and at least 4 suppliers who don't appear to exist beyond the ledger entries paying them. Conservatively, she tapped the final page, your estate has lost somewhere near £40,000. It could be more. I haven't finished." Nathan stared at the pages, then at her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "You did this in 3 days. I did this in 3 nights, she corrected. The days were rather boring. For one strange, suspended moment, something almost like amusement crossed his face, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the colder calculation she was beginning to recognize as his default state. Whitlock has managed this estate for 11 years. My father trusted him. Your father, Amelia said carefully, is not the one whose money is missing now. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into something low and dangerous. Bring me everything you found. All of it. And Amelia, he looked up, and there was something almost like respect buried beneath the ice. Do not confront him yourself. Not yet. She should have listened. She fully intended to listen, in fact right up until 3 days later, when she overheard Whitlock in the corridor outside the study, assuring a nervous young housemaid that the Duke's new wife was meddling in matters far beyond her understanding and would learn her place soon enough, one way or another.
Something in Amelia went very still and very cold.
She had spent her entire life being told she did not understand things by her father, who called her clever the way one might call a dog obedient, as though it were a trick and not a mind, by her mother, who valued her only for what she could be traded for. She had crossed an entire ballroom in tears, while men decided her worth without once asking her opinion of it. She was not going to sit quietly in a library while a thief decided her place in a house that was, technically, now half her own. She found Whitlock in his office that same afternoon, hunched over the very ledgers she'd already memorized, and she did not knock. Mr. Whitlock, she said, closing the door behind her with a soft, deliberate click. I'd like to discuss the roofing invoice from March. The one billed twice to a supplier who, as it turns out, closed his business in Yorkshire 4 years before that invoice was ever written. His quill stopped moving. Slowly he looked up, and whatever calculation crossed his face at that moment told her everything she needed to know before he'd said a single word. Your Grace, he said carefully, I'm certain there's a simple explanation. There is. Amelia crossed the room and set her own pages beside his ledger, page after page of dates and discrepancies laid out with surgical precision. The simple explanation is that you have been stealing from the Duke of Kingscroft for at least 2 years, likely longer, and structuring the theft carefully enough that no one bothered to check your work because everyone assumed a man with 11 years of loyal service was beyond suspicion. She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. I am not everyone, Mr. Whitlock. The colour drained slowly from his face. You cannot possibly. I already have. She tapped the final total, the number that had kept her awake 3 nights running. £43,000, Mr. Whitlock. That's what I've traced so far. I imagine a more thorough audit, one with the authority to seize your personal accounts, would find considerably more. His composure cracked at last, desperation bleeding into his voice. Please, Your Grace, I have a family if His Grace hears of this. He already knows, Amelia said quietly. I told him 3 days ago. The only reason you're still sitting behind that desk is that I asked him to let me speak with you first. She let that settle, watched the fear sharpen behind his eyes. You will resign this afternoon. You will return what remains of what you've taken. And you will thank whatever God you pray to that I am the one who found this, and not a magistrate. Whitlock's hands trembled as he reached for his own quill, and Amelia stood in the doorway and watched a man who had underestimated her for the entirety of their brief acquaintance sign away 11 years of stolen comfort in silence. She did not feel triumphant exactly. She felt something steadier than that, the quiet, unfamiliar satisfaction of being right and being believed for perhaps the first time in her life. Mrs. Hargrove was waiting in the corridor when she emerged, arms folded in her usual severe posture. though something in her weathered face had changed since the morning Amelia arrived weeping and trembling on these steps.
I heard, the housekeeper said, simply.
Amelia braced herself for a reprimand. I know the Duke told me to wait. I heard, Mrs. Hargrove repeated, cutting her off, that you caught in 3 nights what this household failed to notice in 11 years. A pause, brief and weighty. This house has needed someone with a sharp mind for a long time, Your Grace. I begin to think it may have finally gotten one. It was not warmth. Exactly, Mrs. Hargrove did not seem a woman built for warmth, but it was respect, plainly offered. And Amelia found it settled somewhere deep in her chest, in a place that had gone hungry for a very long time. Nathan's reaction, when he returned that evening to find his steward gone and £40,000 worth of fraud laid bare on his desk, was considerably harder to read. You disobeyed me, he said, standing in the doorway of the study, his coat still damp from travel. I did, Amelia agreed, not looking up from the papers she was still sorting. And I was right to. He would have destroyed those records the moment he suspected you knew. I gave him no time to. Nathan crossed the room slowly, picked up the signed resignation and read it twice. You're either the most reckless woman I've ever met, he said finally, or the most capable one. I confess I haven't decided which. Perhaps, Amelia said, meeting his eyes at last, refusing to be the first to look away. I am both. Perhaps that's precisely why your household needed me here, whatever your original reasons for bringing me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and something passed between them that was not quite trust, not yet, but was, perhaps, the first honest crack in the cold wall he had built around this entire arrangement. There will be more like him, Nathan said finally, quiet and grim. This estate has enemies who would very much like to see it bled dry from the inside before they finish the job from outside it. If you found this in 3 nights, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Amelia felt something cold settle low in her stomach, not fear, exactly, but the sharpening awareness that whatever she had stumbled into was larger and darker than one thieving steward. She would not have longed to wonder how much larger. The letter arrived 11 days later, delivered by a footman who clearly did not know what to make of the crest pressed into its wax seal, a crest Amelia recognized instantly. The same one that had adorned the invitations to 100 balls she'd attended as a girl still permitted to believe her family loved her. Her mother's hand. She stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal, her fingers unsteady in a way she despised herself for. My darling Amelia, it began, and the familiar honeyed script made her stomach turn even before she'd read the rest. I have thought of nothing but you since that terrible night. Your father acted rashly, you know how he is when the drink and the debts overwhelm him, and I have begged him daily to make amends. Please come to tea at the Hendricks Garden on Thursday. Just the 2 of us. A mother and daughter, nothing more. I only wish to see with my own eyes that you are well, and to tell you how deeply I regret how everything unfolded.
All my love, always, Mother.
Amelia read it 3 times, and each time some small, wounded part of her, the part that had spent 22 years starving for exactly these words, wanted desperately to believe them. She was still standing in the entrance hall with the letter trembling in her hand when Nathan found her, returning from another of his unexplained absences, mud still on his boots. What is it? He asked, and something in his tone told her he already suspected. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it in silence, his expression darkening with every line, and when he finished, he folded it closed with a precision that felt almost violent. You cannot go. I wasn't asking your permission, Amelia said, though her voice lacked its usual steel because some traitorous part of her still wanted this to be true. still wanted a mother who loved her more than she loved diamonds and debts. Amelia, Nathan's voice gentled, just slightly, just enough to make her look up. I received word this morning from a contact inside the magistrate's office. Your father met privately with the same creditor from the ballroom 4 days ago. And your mother, he held up the letter, has never once in her life asked to see you without an audience, without advantage, without something to gain. You know this. You've known it your whole life. The truth of it landed like a blow, precisely because it was true, precisely because some exhausted, hopeful part of her had known it the moment she'd broken the seal and let herself hope anyway. They want something from me, she said quietly, and it was not a question. They want you back within reach, Nathan said grimly. Whether that means reconciliation, ransom, or something considerably worse, I don't yet know. But I know your parents did not spend 22 years failing to love you, and suddenly discover affection the same week you became a Duchess with access to my accounts. Amelia closed her eyes, and for one raw moment, the composure she had fought so hard to rebuild threatened to crack entirely. I know, she whispered. I know what they are. I've always known. She stopped, ashamed of the tears gathering despite herself. You wanted it to be real, Nathan finished, quieter than she'd ever heard him. Wanting a parent's love to be real isn't foolishness, Amelia. It's simply what it costs to have a heart at all. She looked up at him, startled by the gentleness in it, so at odds with the cold, calculating man who had negotiated terms across a breakfast table like a business contract. What do we do? She asked. Something sharpened in his gaze, not cold now, but focused, purposeful, the look of a man assembling a battle plan. We do not ignore it, he said slowly. We do not walk into it blind either. If your parents are plotting something, the safest place for you is not refusing them outright, it's letting them believe they still have a hand to play, while we watch every move they make. He met her eyes, and there was something almost like an invitation in them. You found a thief hiding in my own household in 3 nights, Amelia. I imagine uncovering whatever your parents are planning will not tax you nearly as much. For the first time since the ballroom, since the tears and the terror and the paper waiting for a final signature, Amelia felt something steady and unfamiliar settle into place beside the fear.
Not safe, exactly. Not yet. Not yet. But purpose sharp and hers, and entirely her own, to wield.
And somewhere beyond the iron gates of Kingscroft Manor, in a house smelling of damp wood and old desperation, her mother sealed a second letter with the same practiced honeyed hand, already certain her daughter would come. She had no idea, yet, exactly how wrong she was about to be. The letter Amelia sent back to her mother was, on its surface, everything Lady Evermont could have hoped for, warm, contrite, aching with a daughter's loneliness. I have missed you more than I can say, it read. Kingscroft Manor is beautiful, but it is also... I would very much like to see a familiar face. Every word had been chosen with Nathan standing over her shoulder, and every word was, in its own way, a trap dressed as a white flag. She'll believe it, Amelia murmured, sealing the wax with a steadiness that surprised her. She wants to believe it. That's always been her weakness. She assumes everyone else is as easily flattered as she is. Nathan watched her from across the desk, arms folded, something like admiration flickering behind his usual reserve. You learn to survive them by studying them, he said. That's rarer than people think. Most victims spend their lives trying to forget their tormentors. You spent yours understanding yours. It seemed more useful, Amelia said simply, than crying about it. She did not tell him that she still cried about it, some nights, alone in rooms too large and too quiet that understanding her parents had never once stopped her from wanting, foolishly, for them to be different people entirely. She did not have to say it. Something in his eyes told her he already knew. It was 3 days later, in the grey hush of early afternoon, that she first noticed her lady's maid lingering a beat too long over the writing desk in her private sitting room. Celia had been assigned to her the week she arrived, young, soft-spoken, endlessly attentive, the kind of quiet presence Amelia had barely registered beyond the practical comfort of an extra pair of hands with her hair and her gowns. She had never once thought to question her. She questioned her now. Amelia had left the room only minutes before. Ledger pages spread across the desk from her ongoing audit of Whitlock's replacement accounts habit now. More than necessity, the numbers a kind of comfort she hadn't realized she'd come to need. She had forgotten her shawl. She returned for it silently, in slippers that made no sound against the carpet, and found Celia bent over those very pages with a folded square of parchment in hand, copying figures in small, hurried script. Amelia stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long, deliberate moment, watching the maid's quill move with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before.
Interesting penmanship, Amelia said finally, quiet as a blade sliding free of its sheath.
Celia startled so violently, the quill clattered from her hand, ink spattering across the desk in a small black constellation. Her face went the colour of chalk. "Your Grace, I was only the dust, I was only tidying." "You were copying my private financial notes," Amelia said, stepping fully into the room, closing the door behind her with the same soft, deliberate click she'd used on Whitlock weeks before. "I recognise the posture. I've used it myself, on ledgers that weren't mine to read either." She crossed the room slowly, picked up the folded parchment before Celia's trembling hands could snatch it back, and unfolded it to find her own numbers, the estate's recovered accounts, the recent audits, even a private note about Nathan's unexplained absences, copied in painstaking detail.
"Please," Celia whispered, tears rising fast. "Please, Your Grace, I didn't want to."
"Who is paying you?" Amelia asked, and there was no cruelty in it, only the same relentless precision she'd used on a thieving steward, because she had learned, hard and early, that mercy and weakness were not the same thing, and that the truth mattered more than anyone's comfort, including her own. Celia's composure was shattered entirely. She sank into the nearest chair, sobbing into her hands, and it took several long minutes Amelia spent simply standing, patient and unmoving, letting the silence do what shouting never could before the girl finally spoke. "Your father," Celia said, barely audible. "Lord Evermont. He came to me the week you arrived. He said if I didn't help him, he'd see my family thrown out of the cottage they rent from him. He said it wasn't a betrayal, just information. Just numbers. He said you'd never even notice." Amelia felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest, not surprise, never surprise, not where her parents were concerned, but something heavier. Something like grief for the version of her father who might have existed in some other life, one who loved his daughter instead of pricing her. "He's been building a picture of the marriage," Amelia said slowly, working it through even as she spoke. "The accounts. Nathan's movements. Looking for weakness. Looking for leverage." She looked at the weeping girl before her and made a decision that surprised even herself. "Stop crying, Celia. You're not going to be punished."
Celia looked up, disbelieving. "Your Grace?"
"You're going to help me," Amelia said, and for the first time since the ballroom, something sharp and purposeful lit behind her eyes, in a rather different way than my father intended. Nathan's reaction, when Amelia laid the entire scheme before him that evening, was not the fury she had half expected. It was something colder, and far more dangerous, the particular stillness of a man recalculating an enemy's next several moves in real time. "Your father is testing the walls," he said, pacing the length of the study, looking for cracks before he commits to anything larger. If we simply dismiss the maid, he'll know we discovered her, and he'll retreat to plan something we can't see coming. He stopped, looked at Amelia with an expression she was beginning to recognize as respect. But if we let her keep reporting, and control precisely what she reports, we choose what he believes, Amelia finished, instead of letting him choose what he assumes. A slow, dangerous smile crossed Nathan's face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the night he'd torn a marriage contract in half in front of 100 witnesses. "Remind me," he said, "never to underestimate you." "You already have twice," Amelia said. "I'd hate for it to become a habit." The plan, once assembled, was elegant in its cruelty, Amelia reasoned, being an entirely reasonable currency to trade with people who had tried to sell her like livestock. Celia would continue her reports, exactly as instructed, except now every word would be carefully manufactured. A marriage cracking under strain, a duke growing cold and distant, a duchess desperate and isolated and, crucially, increasingly willing to consider other arrangements, the exact bait a man drowning in debt could never resist reaching for. "He'll come himself," Nathan said, reviewing the false reports Amelia drafted with unsettling fluency. "Once he believes the marriage is failing, he won't trust this to letters. He'll want to see the crack with his own eyes, assess how deep it runs, and decide how best to exploit it." "Good," Amelia said, and there was something new in her voice now, not the trembling girl from the ballroom, but a woman sharpening herself into a weapon aimed precisely at the people who taught her she had none. "Let him come. Let him walk in believing he still has power over me. I want to watch his face when he learns otherwise." Celia, to her credit, proved a remarkably capable double agent, once given a purpose that wasn't fear feeding Lord Evermont exactly the fractures he wanted to see, reporting back every reply with a diligence that would have made her an excellent spy in any century. Within 2 weeks, Amelia's father had taken the bait entirely, his replies growing bolder, more specific, laced with the particular arrogance of a man who believed he'd already won. "Tell my daughter, one letter read, that her father forgives her foolishness in marrying a man who clearly does not value her. Tell her there are other men, better men, who would treat her worth accordingly. Tell her the door remains open." Amelia read it aloud to Nathan by candlelight one evening, and found herself laughing a short, disbelieving sound, more pain than humour. "He still thinks I'm inventory," she said. "Even now. Even after everything." Nathan set down his glass, watching her carefully. "Does it still surprise you?" "No," Amelia admitted, quieter now. "It just still hurts. I don't think that ever fully stops, does it? Being hurt by someone, even after you've stopped expecting anything better from them." Something moved across Nathan's face, old and shadowed, a grief she hadn't yet seen from him. "No," he said. "It doesn't. But you learn to carry it without letting it decide your next move. That's the difference between surviving your family and being ruled by them." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since the night of the ballroom, and Amelia found herself studying him in the candlelight, wondering not for the first time what dark history had taught the Duke of Kingscroft that particular lesson. She would not have to wonder much longer. The wine that night was older than either of them, pulled from a cellar Nathan rarely opened, and as the candles burned low and the fire crackled against the autumn chill, something in the room's careful formality began, slowly, to dissolve. "You've asked me nothing about my family," Nathan said, refilling her glass without being asked, "in all the weeks you've lived under my roof. Most people can't resist curiosity." "I assumed you'd tell me when you were ready," Amelia said. "I know what it is to have people demand your pain before you're prepared to hand it over." Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something gentler. My father, he said slowly, was murdered when I was 19. Poisoned, at his own dinner table, by his own brother, my uncle, who believed the title should have passed to him instead. It took 3 years to prove it. 3 years of watching my mother waste away from grief while I learned, piece by piece, that half my family would happily see me dead for a signature and a crest.
Amelia said nothing, only listened, the way she had always wished someone would listen to her.
My cousins, Nathan continued, voice roughening, are the last of that branch. Charming. Patient. Utterly without conscience. They've spent a decade circling this estate, waiting for a mistake, a scandal, a legal weakness they can exploit to strip the title from my line entirely. That's the truth of why I needed a wife, Amelia, not romance, not chivalry. An obscure clause in our charter requires the Duke to be wed to secure the estate. Against a specific tax provision my cousins have been quietly manipulating for years. Without a marriage, the charter falls to review. And if it falls to review, they win everything I've spent a decade protecting. The confession landed heavier than she'd expected, not because it surprised her, not entirely, but because of what it confirmed. That the night he'd swept her from that ballroom had never been about her at all. She had simply been a solution to a problem that predated her by years. So I was convenient, she said quietly, testing the shape of the old hurt, surprised to find it duller than she'd expected. Not chosen. Just available at the right legal moment. You were, Nathan agreed, unflinching, because he did not seem a man capable of comfortable lies. But Amelia, he leaned forward, and something in his voice shifted, low and unpracticed in a way she hadn't heard from him before. I did not expect the woman I rescued out of necessity to become the sharpest mind in this house within a month. I did not expect to find myself grateful every single day that circumstance handed me you and not someone else equally convenient. The words hung in the candlelight between them, fragile and unfamiliar, and Amelia found she did not know what to do with the sudden warmth spreading through her chest, because she had spent so long believing herself unwanted that being wanted, even partially, even accidentally, felt like standing too close to a fire she didn't trust to burn her. My cousins will come for both of us eventually, Nathan said, quieter now. Not just the estate. You too, the moment they realize how valuable you've become to me and to this house's survival. I need you to understand that before this goes any further. Whatever this is becoming between us, it comes with a target on your back that has nothing to do with your parents at all. I've had a target on my back since the day I was born, Amelia said softly. At least this one I can see coming. Something in his expression broke open then, not fully, not all at once, but enough that when he reached across the small distance between them and took her hand, she did not pull away. Then let them come, he said. Let your father come, and my cousins after him. We'll meet every single one of them together, or not at all. It was not a declaration of love. It was something steadier than that, forged in candlelight and old wine, and two people who had both learned, the hard way, that survival was its own kind of intimacy, and Amelia thought, watching the firelight catch in his eyes, that she had never once believed a partnership could feel this much like being chosen. She should have known the peace would not last. It rarely did, in a life shaped so completely by other people's ambitions. The invitation arrived a week later, gilt-edged and unmistakable, the Royal Charity Gala, hosted by the Crown itself, an event so prestigious that refusing it was, in aristocratic terms, a kind of social suicide. Nathan's presence was expected. As his Duchess, so was hers. Your father will be there, Nathan said grimly, turning the invitation over in his hands. Every scheming lord in the city will be there. If he's planning anything beyond letters and a maid's stolen notes, This is where he'll attempt it somewhere public enough that he believes we can't retaliate without causing a scandal ourselves. Then we go, Amelia said, steadier than she felt. We go, and we make certain we're the ones holding evidence, not excuses. They spent the following days preparing with the same meticulous care Amelia had once poured, into balancing her father's ignored accounts, compiling copies of every falsified invoice, every forged supplier, every letter proving her father's collusion with the creditor who'd nearly bought her like livestock, every scrap of Celia's genuine testimony now safely notarized and sealed. If her parents intended to strike in public, Amelia intended to make certain the truth struck first and struck harder. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in velvet and candlelight, the Crown's ballroom even grander than the one where this entire nightmare had begun, chandeliers like frozen waterfalls of light, silk and jewels, and the particular electric hum of a room full of people watching each other for the smallest hint of scandal. Amelia wore ruby red, a deliberate choice, a colour that refused to apologise for itself, and as she walked through those doors on Nathan's arm, she felt something settle inside her that had been missing the last time she'd stood in a room like this, not fear, but readiness. She felt her father's eyes find her within minutes, cold and calculating from across the crowded floor, and beside him, unmistakable in his official coat, stood a magistrate she did not recognise, along with two men clutching notebooks with the eager, predatory look of journalists scenting blood in the water. "They've brought an audience," Nathan murmured, his jaw tight. "This isn't a confrontation. This is a performance." He was right. It became clear within the hour, as the magistrate, a florid, self-important man later introduced as Magistrate Vance, approached with a folded document and an expression of theatrical solemnity, flanked by her parents and trailed by the journalists already scribbling.
"Your Grace,"
Vance announced, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear, loud enough for the music to falter and every head in the ballroom to turn. "I hold a formal complaint alleging that Lady Amelia Kingscroft has been held against her will, coerced into marriage, and denied contact with her family under threat. I am obligated to investigate these claims publicly, if necessary." The ballroom erupted into whispers, precisely as her parents had intended, and Amelia felt the old, familiar panic claw up her throat, the sensation of being watched, judged, sold, all over again in front of 100 glittering strangers. Then she looked at her mother's face, cold, satisfied, already savouring the coming humiliation, and something inside Amelia went very still and very calm instead. "An investigation," Amelia said, her voice carrying clean and steady across the stunned silence. "Sounds excellent, Magistrate. I have brought considerably more evidence than you have." She nodded once to the footman standing discreetly near the ballroom's edge, a footman who had, at Nathan's quiet instruction, been holding a leather case since the moment they'd arrived. He crossed the floor and placed it in her hands, and Amelia opened it before the entire assembled crowd, extracting document after document with the same unhurried precision she'd once used to dismantle a thieving steward. "Here," she said, holding up the first, "is a signed letter in my father's own hand, dated the week I was married, offering me to a creditor named Mr. Aldous Fenwick in exchange for the forgiveness of a gambling debt totalling nearly £60,000. She let the murmur ripple through the crowd before continuing. "Here is a notarized statement from my former lady's maid, confirming that my father paid her to report on my private correspondence and financial records, a scheme intended not to protect me, but to find leverage against my husband's estate." Another document, held aloft, steady in hands that did not shake, not once. "And here, Magistrate, is a formal record of my father's meeting with Mr. Fenwick 4 days after this very complaint was drafted, hardly the behaviour of a man desperate to rescue his daughter from captivity." The journalists' pens moved faster now, scribbling with a fervour entirely different from what they'd expected. "This is fabrication," Lord Evermont snarled, stepping forward, his composure finally cracking under the weight of 100 watching eyes. "Lies, invented by a duke desperate to hide his own crimes. The only crime committed in that ballroom, Father," Amelia said, and her voice did not waver, did not break, carried instead with a clarity that silenced even the whispering crowd, "was yours. I stood in front of witnesses while you handed me over to a man like a sack of grain to settle your debts. I have spent every day since proving with facts and figures and signatures that cannot be argued with exactly what kind of man you are. Tonight, I am simply allowing everyone else to see it too."
Lady Evermont's cold composure finally shattered entirely. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed, diamonds flashing under the chandelier light. "Everything we did to survive."
"You did it," Amelia said, quiet now, and somehow that quiet was more devastating than any shout could have been, "to keep your jewellery and your standing and your comfortable lies. I have never once, in my entire life, been anything to either of you but an asset to be spent. I am done pretending otherwise, and after tonight, so is everyone in this room." Magistrate Vance, sweating visibly now under the weight of documents that made his forged warrant look precisely like what it was, stammered something about further review and additional investigation, but the crowd had already turned the particular, brutal turning of aristocratic sympathy, swinging away from the humiliated Evermonts and toward the composed young Duchess, who had just dismantled a public ambush with nothing but paper and unshaking resolve. "I believe," Mathan said, stepping forward at last, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had simply been waiting for the truth to finish its work before delivering the final blow, "that this investigation is concluded, Magistrate. Unless you'd care to explain to the Crown's own registrar why a forged warrant bearing his falsified signature happened to arrive in your hands this evening." Vance's florid face went the colour of ash. He did not answer. He simply gathered his coat, muttered something about further inquiry required, and fled the ballroom with as much dignity as a man could manage while being watched by 200 aristocrats and a growing crowd of scandal-hungry journalists.
Her parents did not flee quite so gracefully.
They stood, exposed and humiliated in the very ballroom where they had once nearly sold their daughter without a flicker of shame, and watched their reputation dissolve in real time, the whispers turning cruel now, the sympathetic glances that had once been offered to grieving debtors curdling into open contempt. Amelia did not gloat. She found, standing there in ruby red with her evidence still fanned across her hands, that she did not need to. The truth, laid bare and undeniable, had done more damage to her parents in 10 minutes than a lifetime of her silent suffering ever could have. "This isn't finished," Lord Evermont said, low and venomous, as guards began quietly moving to escort him from the premises. "You'll regret this, Amelia. Family is family." "You taught me otherwise," Amelia said simply, and turned away from him for what she intended to be the last time in her life. Nathan's hand found the small of her back, steady and warm, and as they walked from that ballroom together, not fleeing this time, but leaving on their own terms, heads high, evidence secured, Amelia felt something inside her finally settle into place. She had spent her whole life being defined by other people's greed. Tonight, for the first time, she had defined herself.
She would not stop there.
The following morning, Nathan arrived at her sitting room before she'd even finished her tea, a determined set to his jaw that told her, before he'd said a single word, that they were not finished with the Evermonts yet. "Your father's creditors are circling," he said, laying a fresh stack of correspondence on the table between them. "Word of last night has already reached half the city. Every debt he's ever deferred through fear and reputation is about to come due, all at once, now that no one is afraid of him anymore. He met her eyes. We could let it happen naturally. Watch him drown in the mess he built. But, Amelia said, hearing the word he hadn't spoken yet. But I think you deserve to be the one who closes the ledger, Nathan said quietly, rather than leaving it to strangers who never suffered what you suffered. If you want it. Only if you want it. Amelia thought of the family ledger she'd grown up beneath generations of Evermont names, inscribed in careful script, her own name written among them as though she were nothing more than an entry to be recorded, and eventually. She thought of every year she had spent trying to earn love from people who had only ever seen her as currency. I want it, she said. I want to be the one who ends this. Not for revenge. For every version of myself who believed, even for a moment, that I deserved to be sold. They arrived at Belrose Manor 2 days later, not with an army, but with something considerably more devastating in a household already collapsing under the weight of its own debts, 6 of Nathan's most trusted guards, a small legion of legal dossiers, and a certainty that could not be argued, bribed, or threatened away. The house looked smaller than Amelia, remembered the grand facades that had once seemed so imposing now visibly frayed, curtains drawn against creditors who no longer bothered knocking politely. Her father met them in the same study where she had once watched him, through a crack in the door, sign away her name to a stranger. He looked older, diminished. A man finally confronted with the full weight of the consequences he had spent a lifetime avoiding.
Come to gloat? He asked, though the venom in his voice had thinned considerably since the ballroom.
Come to finish what you started, Amelia said, setting the leather case on his desk, the same desk, she realized, where he had once tallied her worth like a butcher pricing meat. You have 2 choices, father. You can sign a full legal confession of the fraud committed against Nathan's estate, the forged debts, and the attempted sale of your own daughter, and in exchange, the Crown's prosecutors will pursue only the estate's recovery, not your imprisonment. Or you can refuse, and I promise you, every document in this case will be presented in open court, where the penalty for what you attempted will not be nearly so forgiving. Lord Evermont's hands trembled over the papers, and for a long, silent moment, Amelia watched the last of her father's arrogance finally crumble into something smaller and far more honest fear, plain and unadorned. The same fear he had once been so willing to trade away his own daughter to avoid. Your mother will never forgive this, he said quietly, reaching for the quill. She stopped being someone whose forgiveness I needed, Amelia said, the moment she called it comfort to be sold. He signed. The confession, the restitution, the formal severance of every fraudulent claim he'd built against Nathan's estate page after page, until the study fell silent except for the scratch of a quill finally writing something true. When it was finished, Amelia did not leave immediately. She crossed instead to the shelf where the family ledger still sat, dust thickened, exactly where she'd last seen it generations of Evermonts recorded in faded, careful ink, her own name still written among them, as though she still belonged there. She opened it to the page bearing her name, and with hands that did not shake not once, not any more, she tore it free. Cleanly. Completely. The sound of parchment ripping seemed, in that quiet, ruined study, louder than anything her father had shouted at her in 22 years combined. I am not your ledger entry anymore, she said, folding the torn page and slipping it into her pocket not to keep as a wound, but as proof of exactly how far she had come from the girl who'd once been nearly signed away in a ballroom. I never should have been one.
Her father said nothing. There was nothing left for him to say.
Outside, the carriage waited beneath a sky finally clearing after weeks of rain, and Nathan stood beside it, watching her cross the ruined grounds of the only home she'd ever known with a steadiness in her stride, that hadn't been there the night he'd first carried her away from it. "How do you feel?" he asked as she reached him. Amelia considered the question honestly, the way she'd learned to consider everything now with clear eyes, unflinching, refusing to accept comfortable lies even from herself. "Free," she said finally, and found for the first time in her life that the word fit exactly the way it was supposed to. Truly free. "Not because you rescued me, Nathan. Because I finally rescued myself." He reached for her hand, and this time there was nothing transactional in it. Nothing born of necessity or obscure legal clauses, only two people who had survived their separate wars and found, against every reasonable expectation, an equal on the other side of them.
"Then let's go home," he said.
And for the first time since a chandelier-lit ballroom had nearly stolen her entire future, home was a word that finally meant exactly what it should. If you have ever sat across a table from a family and wondered whether their love came with a price tag attached, if you have ever had to choose between the comfort of old loyalty and the terrifying freedom of finally walking away,
Amelia's story was written for you.
tell me, in a family like the Evermonts, would you have signed the confession or burned the whole ledger to the ground? And if you believe, like Amelia did, that the family you're born into doesn't always have to be the one you keep, stay close, because there are so many more women like her still finding their way out of ballrooms just like that one, and I intend to tell every single one of their stories.